Summary of Negotiation by Harvard Business Essentials. Negotiating concepts. Individuals see the world differently, but sometimes they need to reach agreements on how to operate in the world they share. Unless you have the power to impose your will on others, you must negotiate. Whether you are trying to reach an agreement on the price of a new car or working out how much you'll pay an entire labor force, you communicate back and forth until you reach an agreement. Does the conversation go smoothly? Almost never. However, negotiation is a skill like any other, and you can learn it. Negotiations come in two types. 1. Distributive. In these negotiations, the question is how to divide a fixed sum of value. If you have ever haggled over a price, you've engaged in a distributive negotiation. It's a win-lose, zero-sum game in which you compete with the other party. The more you give up, the more the other person gets, and vice versa. 2. Integrative. In these win-win negotiations, the parties cooperate to produce the best outcome for all. Instead of focusing on short-term wins and grabbing as much as you can for your side, you develop ongoing relationships. In real life, a negotiation is rarely purely distributive or integrative. Rather, it falls somewhere between the two, along a continuum. Classifying a negotiation is not simple because negotiations may involve more than two parties and more than one agreement. In multi-party negotiations, some participants may see the negotiation as distributive while others see it as integrative. In multi-phase negotiations, you make a series of agreements. How faithfully you carry out the earlier agreements determines the level of trust you share later. ZOPAs and BATNAs. Your reservation price is the lowest offer you'll accept, and the zone of possible agreements, or ZOPA, is the distance between your reservation price and that of the other party. Do not reveal your reservation price, because it will anchor the negotiation at the wrong end of the ZOPA. However, do try to learn the other party's ZOPA, so you can push for a deal close to it. BATNA stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, what you'll do if you can't reach an agreement. If you know your BATNA, you know when to leave the table and when to stay and fight. If you don't have a BATNA in mind, you may accept an unnecessarily low offer. Determining your BATNA is not always straightforward. Often, it involves weighing factors that are hard to compare. Even if your BATNA is ambiguous or weak, you have options. You can strengthen it or you can weaken the other party's outcome. To do either, you must gather information. Identify your resources and the other parties, as well as relevant resources in your industry. Cultivate alternatives. Make your pitch to other buyers or employers. You may end up with a better arrangement than you originally expected. Preparing to negotiate. Take 9 steps to prepare for a negotiation. 1. Consider what a good outcome would be for you and the other side. Define success. List your needs and wants, then prioritize them. 2. Identify potential value creation opportunities. Identify areas of agreement, possible compromises and elements you're willing to trade. 3. Identify your BATNA and reservation price, and do the same for the other side. Use the information you gathered in the previous steps. 4. Shore up your BATNA. If you know the conditions under which you would terminate the negotiation, you can avoid looking needy to the other side. 5. Anticipate the authority issue. Make sure you're dealing with people who have the authority to make decisions. If you find that you're not, insist that agreements aren't final until the decision makers ratify them. 6. Learn all you can about the other side's people and culture. Understand their goals and how they framed the issue. Put yourself in their shoes and anticipate their goals, needs and wants. 7. Prepare for flexibility in the process. Don't lock yourself into a rigid sequence. Expect the negotiation to evolve as you interact. Every negotiation is different. 8. Gather external standards and criteria relevant to fairness. Ground your negotiations in reality. Research factors such as prices, processes and resources. 9. Alter the process in your favor. If you feel the other parties are ignoring your interests, do your homework away from the table to change the process. Think of international negotiations, where the parties may debate procedures for months before they sit at the table together. They may even debate the shape of the table. Starting the negotiation. Once you've brought all the relevant parties together, establish expectations and boundaries. Interacting socially, perhaps over a meal, helps develop emotional bonds and trust. Chatting before the formal negotiation will teach you about the other party's speaking styles and personalities. Relax with them, but learn from your interactions. When you reach the negotiating table, frame your interaction in a positive light. Express respect and a desire for mutual benefit. Make sure everyone understands the terms and process of the negotiation. Establish ground rules and create an agenda. Start with the simplest issues to build trust and momentum. Distributive negotiations. If the negotiation is distributive, the first offers are crucial. They will anchor future discussions, so don't allow the other parties to establish the bottom line on their behalf, for example, by persuading you to state a range of offers. They'll use that information to moor the deal at the low end. If they try to anchor the deal by making a ridiculously low offer, treat it as a joke or simply state that it's unacceptable. Make the first offer yourself. Reframe their offer by making a counteroffer or propose looking at things in a different way altogether. Don't make concessions too early or the other side will assume that you're willing to concede even more. Make exploding offers, ones that have time limits. Exploding offers pressure others to agree and limit the amount of time they have to find BATNAs. If you can, present more than one alternative to give the impression that you're flexible and aren't forcing a decision. As you get closer to an agreement, let the other parties know that you believe the negotiation is coming to an end. Also let them know if you're willing to extend it, for example, if they need to get approval from a higher-ranking executive. Put agreements in writing. If the other party pushes for changes after you've completed negotiations, explain that any alterations will reopen the entire negotiation. Integrative negotiations. Start integrative negotiations by sharing information. Ask open-ended questions and allow time for the other party to answer. Listen carefully, note how the situation evolves and be empathic. Keeping an eye on your interests actually benefits both sides, since much of the value you create in an integrative negotiation arises out of the gaps between the parties' values and resources. Create value through trades. That is, talk until you discover that you have something that isn't valuable to you, but is of value to the other side. Then swap. Negotiating challenges. If you're approaching a negotiation as integrative and the other party sees it as distributive, you're at a disadvantage, and you are taking a risk when you share information. Educate the other parties about the advantages of working together. Test them. Share a little information and see how they respond. If they take unfair advantage of it, treat the negotiation as distributive. Take steps to strengthen your position, starting with your BATNA. Follow a similar strategy when you're dealing with an unfamiliar counterpart on short notice. Lacking the time to research the other party, you must test him or her in the moment. Proceed incrementally, sharing small nuggets of information and observing the response you get. If the other party gets angry easily, don't respond in kind. Stay calm. Point out that anger won't get either of you anywhere. If you're faced with dishonesty, educate the other party on the need for probity. However, don't stop there. Protect yourself against betrayal by building mechanisms for verification and compliance into the contract. Especially in multi-party negotiations, you may encounter spoilers, people who actively try to block negotiations. Research the alternatives and try to find other people to take their place. If you must deal with spoilers, learn their needs and motivations. Anticipate their questions and prepare your answers. Explain how the proposed deal will benefit them and how blocking it will hurt them. Some negotiating barriers are structural, for example, if all authorized parties are not present or if your deal depends on another deal that's not complete. In such cases, take a step back. Suspend negotiations until all parties are present or separate the linked negotiations. Sometimes barriers arise because of differences in the parties' cultural backgrounds, ages, or genders. However, don't fall into the trap of assuming that the problems in a negotiation marked by such diversity stem from these differences. Instead, examine your patterns of interaction and identify the real problems. Sometimes, you may simply have trouble communicating. Review your interactions to see where things have gone wrong and correct the problem areas. For example, change your pace or style. If another spokesperson would do a better job for your organization, step aside. Always record the results of a negotiation. If you're plagued by communication troubles, record each step along the way in detail. The following problems arise because of the attitude of the negotiator. In these situations, patience and fairness will lead to solutions. Irrational escalation, bidding things up beyond sense, because of ego, excitement, or a gap between principal and agent. Avoid this problem by figuring out your limits before you start. Partisan perception, bias or paranoia cause this problem. Build a shared worldview by summing up the situation and asking the other side if your account is accurate. Unrealistic expectations, because of a false sense of the market or their own worth. Some people wildly overestimate what they can get. Educate them and bring them down to reality. Negotiation and relationships. Your relationships with others can complicate negotiations 3 ways. 1. The relationship is more important than the negotiation. This happens, for example, if you're negotiating with family members. Evaluate to what extent you will let the relationship determine your actions. Communicate your needs and perceptions, and check with the other parties often to find out how they view things. 2. You are using an agent to negotiate for you, or you are acting as agent. Employ an agent when you need help from someone who has special knowledge of the situation, or when you need to distance yourself from the negotiation. If you and your agent start with different interests and levels of information, bridge those gaps. If necessary, add incentives to make sure your agent's interests align with yours. If you are acting as an agent, make sure you have no conflicts of interest. 3. Your organization wants to improve its negotiating skill. Teach negotiation as a process. In each negotiation, make sure every member of the team understands the organization's goals and BATNA. Identify and reward the best negotiators, and use their experience to train others.